There is a diary inside your mouth. You did not write it. You cannot read it. It sits in the layers of your teeth. Every few weeks of your childhood left one line in it, not a memory, a chemical, what you drank, what you breathed, what the dust on your street was made of. Teeth grow the way trees grow, outward in bands, one layer at a time. Once a layer closes, nothing can edit it. And in almost every human tooth ever tested, one entry keeps repeating: lead. The oldest of those diaries is 2 million years old. Lead does nothing useful inside a body. It has no job there. There is no known safe level at any age. It damages memory, learning, and behavior. It damages children most, which creates a problem. Taking lead out of petrol, paint, and pipes is called one of the great public health victories of the last century. That story needs a starting point, a before, a clean human. In October 2025, a laboratory in Lismore, Australia went looking for the clean human. It could not find one. The standard story of lead is not a myth. It is one of the best documented stories in science. It begins in the mines of the Mediterranean. Roman engineers ran drinking water through lead pipes. They boiled wine down in lead pots to sweeten it. That smelting left fallout. The fallout drifted north. It fell on Greenland, and it froze. In January 2025, Joe McConnell and his team at the Desert Research Institute published their measurements in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They read the Greenland ice year by year, like a stack of dated receipts. Roman lead output, they calculated, was heavy enough to take 2 to 3 points off the average childhood IQ across Europe. Then the trail goes quiet for 1,000 years. Then it comes back, much louder. 1923. Tetraethyl lead is added to petrol to stop engines knocking. Within 40 years, almost every car in America runs on it. The exhaust settles on cities, on farmland, on that same Greenland ice. Every part of this is true. The trouble is not what the story states. It is what the story quietly implies. It implies a baseline. It implies that before the smelters, human blood ran clean. Nobody had ever checked the bodies. Checking meant 2 things at once: teeth old enough to matter and a machine sensitive enough to read them. Southern Cross University runs a facility in Lismore, New South Wales, called GARG. Its lasers cut a track finer than a human hair across the face of a fossil tooth. On the 15th of October 2025, that laboratory published its results in Science Advances, together with Mount Sinai in New York and the University of California, San Diego. The title of the paper is flat and unexcited: The Impact of Intermittent Lead Exposure on Hominid Brain Evolution. 51 fossil teeth, 2 million years. Roughly 25,000 human lifetimes, laid end to end. Every single species tested carried the metal. There was no clean human. There was never a before. And that changes what the last 100 years actually did. The record is teeth, and it has to be teeth because teeth are the only part of a body that keeps a schedule. Bone rebuilds itself. It overwrites its own history every few years. Enamel does not. Enamel is laid down once, in childhood, and then abandoned there. It is the one tissue in a body that cannot lie about the past. The 51 teeth came from Africa, Asia, Europe, and Oceania. Australopithecus africanus, from the caves of South Africa. Paranthropus robustus, early Homo. Orangutans, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, and Gigantopithecus blacki. The largest ape that ever lived, roughly 3 meters standing, taller than a basketball hoop, from the limestone caves of southern China. Under the laser, none of the teeth showed a smooth background hum of lead. They showed bands, sharp lines of metal sitting between clean layers. Something happened. Then it stopped. Then it happened again. The Gigantopithecus teeth, around 1.8 million years old, carried the most frequent bands of all. Whatever this was, it was old, it was everywhere, and it arrived in waves. Which leaves one question. How could anyone possibly know that? The method is borrowed from a hospital, not from a museum. For 20 years, the Exposomics laboratory at Mount Sinai in New York has been reading children's baby teeth. The idea is simple. A tooth grows in daily layers. Point a laser at one layer and vaporize a speck of it. Feed that speck into a mass spectrometer, and it reports what the child's blood was carrying that week. A tooth is a stack of every week a child ever lived, in order. There is even a starting mark, a dark line laid down in the hours around birth, called the neonatal line. Count outward from it, and the calendar is exact. Mount Sinai used this to tie early chemical exposure to later development in living children. The Lismore team pointed the same laser at fossils. Same principle, different scale. Instead of counting weeks out from a birth in New York, they counted weeks out from a birth 2 million years ago. And the machine gave them dates. A paranthropus child in South Africa, exposed across a stretch of weeks, then clear. A Neanderthal child in Europe, exposed, then clear, then exposed again. The lead was coming out of the ground itself. Volcanic dust, contaminated groundwater, cave sediment. Nobody was mining anything. The planet was doing it on its own. In 1948, a graduate student at the University of Chicago was handed a small assignment. His name was Claire Patterson. The task was to date the Earth. The plan was to count lead isotopes inside a meteorite. His supervisor told him it would be easy. It was not. Every reading came back wrong, not slightly wrong, absurdly wrong. Patterson washed the beakers. The reading stayed wrong. He distilled his own water. Still wrong. Eventually, he understood what was happening. The lead was not in the meteorite. It was in the glass, in the water, in the air of the room, on his own hands. His laboratory was contaminated before any experiment began. So was every laboratory on Earth. So Patterson built the first clean room in geochemistry at Caltech and finally got his number. 4.5 billion years, the age of the planet. It is still in the textbooks. But he could not let the contamination go. He had spent 7 years being beaten by a background that nobody else could see. Patterson wanted to know what normal actually was. For that, he needed bodies from before the smoke. So he collected the skeletons of Peruvians who died around 1600 years ago. He measured lead against calcium in their bones and did the same for modern cadavers. The gap was not a few percent. Modern bone held between 700 and 1,200 times more lead. Where the ancient skeleton held a grain, the modern one held a spoonful. In 1965, he published it in Archives of Environmental Health. The medical baseline for normal blood lead, he argued, was not normal at all. It was the poisoned average of a poisoned century. The lead industry went after him. He lost contracts. He was left off federal panels. He was also right. Leaded petrol left American pumps by 1986. Patterson spent his life proving one thing, that no human being had ever lived with lead like this before. The Lismore teeth agree with him about the amount. They disagree with him about the word never. Bands in a tooth prove exposure. They do not prove an effect. For that, the team turned to a gene called Nova-1. Nova-1 helps organize how a developing brain wires itself. Modern humans carry a version of it that differs from the Neanderthal version by a single letter of DNA. One letter out of 3 billion. Nobody knew why it changed. At the University of California, San Diego, Alison Mootri's laboratory grows brain organoids, clusters of human stem cells a few millimeters across that organize themselves the way early brain tissue does. His team built 2 sets. One carried the modern Nova-1, one carried the archaic version, then both were exposed to lead. The organoids with the archaic gene showed disrupted activity in neurons expressing FOXP2. FOXP2 is the gene most closely tied to human speech and language. The organoids with the modern gene showed far less disruption. Same poison, different letter, different outcome for language. There is an obvious conclusion sitting there, and it spread fast. Lead killed the Neanderthals. Lead handed humans speech. Poison built the modern mind. That conclusion has a serious problem, and the problem has a name. In October 2021, Tomislav Maricic and Svante Pabo at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig published a comment in Science. They had gone through the sequencing data behind Motri's earlier Nova-1 organoid work. Some of the edited cell lines they reported carried unintended deletions. The dramatic differences might come from that damage, not from the ancient letter. Motri's team answered, tested the flag sites, and stood by the results. Pabo, who sequenced the Neanderthal genome and won a Nobel Prize for it, has not withdrawn the objection. So the fossils are solid. 2 million years of bands is measurement. The gene story is a hypothesis with a live fight attached to it, which leaves the strongest finding in the whole paper sitting in plain sight, unclaimed. Look again at the shape of the data, not the amount, the shape, bands, exposure, then nothing. Weeks of metal, then years of clean growth. Then look again at the second source the paper identified. Some of that lead did not come from outside at all. It came back out of the individual's own skeleton, released during illness or hunger. A body only builds a storage system for something that arrives in pulses. Take it in when it comes. Let it out slowly when times are hard. Clear the rest in between. That is a design for an intermittent world. Now set Patterson's number beside it, 700 to 1,200 times more. Industry did not introduce a poison the human body had never met. The body had met it for 2 million years. What industry removed was the gap. The exposure stopped being an event. It became the air. Nothing in 2 million years prepared a child for a dose that never ends. Here is where that lands, in a specific week, in your own house. About 95% of the lead in your body is not moving through it. It is stored in your bones. Your skeleton is a bank. It has been taking deposits since you were small. Some of those deposits arrived before you could speak, and a bank pays out. Bone is living tissue, and it rebuilds itself constantly. When you are ill for a week, when you are pregnant, when you get older and bone thins, part of the store goes back into your blood. The lead you met at 4 is not finished with you. The deposits have not stopped either. Tomorrow morning, the water in your pipes will have stood still for 8 hours. If your building is old, that water has been sitting against old solder all night. Running the tap for 30 seconds changes what ends up in the glass. That is the entire distance between the fossil record and your kitchen. 2 million years of pulses, and one tap that never turns off. The Lismore paper does not say that lead was good. Nothing in it says that. There is still no safe level. The metal still takes points off a child's development, in Rome and in every century since. What the 51 teeth changed is the shape of the question. Lead was not something humanity invented and then had to survive. It was already in the story, in the water of the caves, in the dust of the volcanoes, in the teeth of a giant ape in southern China. The species that walked out of that world carried one small genetic adjustment tuned to a world that arrived in waves. Then it built a world that does not. And in every mouth, in every country, the recording continues. Layer by layer, week by week, exactly as it always has. The diary is still being written. The band never closes.